On today's podcast, we sit down with Senior Director of A&R, Andrew Grant. It was a really interesting conversation. Andrew comes from a background of being a recording engineer for 10 years, so he brings that perspective to the A&R job, which I thought was really interesting. He knows how hit records are made, and like Jimmy Iovine always said, they're made in the studio. And we talked about a lot of things, about what he looks for, what the best way to reach him is. Some of the most interesting things were we talked about the team. What does an artist need in terms of a team? And you'll find, I think, his answers very, very interesting on that. We also look at how he sells Atlantic Records as the label for artists when he gets into a competitive situation. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we're with Andrew Grant, who is the Senior Director of A&R at Atlantic Records, where we discuss his criteria for artists that he's serious about signing, what it takes to get on his radar, and the value of your team as an artist. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders. Are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured interview is with Andrew Grant, Senior Director of A&R at Atlantic Records. It was an interesting conversation. You know, Andrew comes from a background of being a recording engineer for over 10 years, so he brings a different kind of perspective to A&R that I think than other A&R people that we've spoken with who don't quite have that kind of information. Andrew realizes that real hit records are made in the studio, which I thought was an interesting aspect of the conversation.
I agree, and what's good about it is that him having that experience, he knows what to hear for when looking for hit songs, and the production ability that he's got brings that to the table. Absolutely, I totally agree, and we get into a lot of other aspects of what he looks for, and he's got some very, very interesting views, so I think you'll enjoy it. Absolutely. So with that, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our feature conversation with Andrew Grant. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Thank you. I always like to start these conversations off with a question, especially for people in your profession, which is, at what point in your life did you know that the music industry was going to be your professional career path?
Late middle school, early high school, I wanted to be an artist, but I was also very realistic with myself that there was a chance I wouldn't get a record deal because it's really hard. And so I gave myself a cutoff age that if I didn't have a record deal at that age, that I was going to try to pursue something else in the music industry. So I would say middle school, high school is like when I knew I wanted to pursue music at some degree. Okay, and you pursued it as a career at that point? Yes. Okay. All right, great. Andrew, can you discuss what is your criteria, both creatively and non-creatively, for signing an artist today at Atlantic? I don't feel like there's a set criteria necessarily. I feel like every situation, every artist is different. I feel like a manager that the label has a good relationship with, that's proven success before, could bring somebody, and the label could feel confident in that manager. I feel like there's research signings that the label does on research. I feel like there's raw talent. This is at least with Atlantic. Every label's different, but I feel like that's I feel like Atlantic is pretty open-minded to what they're signing. You know what I mean? As long as they believe in it.
Let me ask you, Andrew, how does an artist get on your radar? How do they reach you? I mean, how do they bring themselves to get your attention?
Honestly, word of mouth for me has been like probably like the biggest thing where like I found like things that I'm fans of. I mean, obviously I check, research, I check data, I get online, but like when someone calls me like, hey, you should check this person out, has been like my highest, like probably like success rate on like finding stuff I believe in.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. So that's all about relationships then.
Yes.
Yeah. Relationships with the people who you trust, who in the industry, whether it's attorneys, managers, publishers.
It's everybody. It's like,
everybody?
It's friends, like, it's friends, it's athletes, it's like, my nephews, cousins, people in the music industry, because like sometimes I feel like people in the industry have like, we're kind of like tainted with our vision, you know what I mean? It's like when you get like an outside perspective, you know what I mean? It's like kind of like refreshing sometimes.
No, that's very, very true. We get locked into like the way it should be.
Yeah.
I see that with myself and so many things like this is the way it's always been, this is the way it should be, this is the standard. And yeah, you gotta become conscious not to do that. That's a good point. It's a good point.
I wanted to ask you, in today's day and age, is there a certain level of artist development that needs to occur prior to you signing an artist?
Again, I think every situation is different. I think there can be an artist that's like fully ready, you know what I mean? And like they just need to come in and, they just need, like our marketing, you know what I mean? Like they need the label push. I think there's other artists that, you can hear, like one good song from them, you hear the rest of it, and it's like it's almost there, but it's not as good as this one song. And I think like that's where you kind of have to like, start the development. Like, okay, like did you write this? Can you do it again? Do we have to get you in with other writers and producers? You know what I mean? It's like I think every situation, is kind of different.
You're in a business, Andrew, that a lot of times I would imagine can become very competitive, professionally speaking. You're after them. Warner's is after them. Columbia's after them. I mean, that's a very real part. You're on the front lines of that.
Yeah.
How do you sell Atlantic Records as the place that an artist needs to be? What are the unique factors that you can sell an artist on that Atlantic is the right home for them? Because I'm sure that that's a part of your A&R job.
I think that the one thing that Atlantic has, not what I think, what I know, Atlantic has the biggest A&R staff from any other record label. I feel like Atlantic does a better job of trying to hire A&Rs that come from like a creative background, that were like hands-on with music. They have research departments, but I feel like a lot of other labels kind of focus strictly on research. You know what I mean? Like there's not as many like, A&R like record makers at other companies. Like I feel like they're good at like identifying like, like something that's trending and signing it, but they're not necessarily as good as we are as like keeping it going and giving them, more records and helping them put together records.
How do you determine when you're signing an act based on a song that is really gaining traction on its own independently, that you have like a real viable long-term act?
I think that's like when, your gut feeling has to come into it. There's a lot of things that have, trended, that have been trending that like some are like, it's like obviously like not something I'd want to sign. Then there's others where, I've, presented it and like someone else might not see it, like, cause again, you can be blinded by research, you know what I mean? So I think when you're taking that approach,
right,
you have to, you have to use your gut at the end of the day for that. And I feel like, for me especially, like all the records that I've, been a part of or that I've put together have all been, like gut feeling or just like spur of the moment, like, oh, like this is the idea. And just, I just like went with it and finished it.
Yeah, it seems like that's the trend. We were just interviewing Kenny from Red Bull Records, and it seems like that's the overarching theme with A&R, that you're really basing your signings on your gut, like what you're really feeling, and you're like, man, I gotta get this out to the world.
Like again, I come from like a music background of wanting to be an artist. Like like I know how to produce. Like I wanted to be a producer. I got into production. I engineered for over 10 years. Like I've engineered big songs. So like I think, coming from that background and like actually like being hands-on with like a hit song
on the front lines, yeah,
like it gives you a different perspective of an A&R person who got hired because they were a good intern but not necessarily came from a musical background. Like all they can do is see data and research and stuff like that. So I think that's like a huge separation.
That's such an interesting point because Jimmy Iovine talked about that very quality because he came from a record production background long before he ever got into running a label. And he said, in his mind, hit records were made in the studio. They weren't made by, teams of people after or in a remix or what. I mean, those things are benefits, but he says, and he's been on the front lines of a lot of massive classic hit records. You just said that, you know how to actually make records. 10 years, I mean, that's quite an extensive history and knowledge where you can go in with an artist and say, no, I know what I'm talking about here, and it's this, In your mind, does that make a difference in terms of how you approach artists creatively, in that you know what it takes to actually do that because you have the engineering background?
I think it depends on the artist. Like if there's an artist who is A&R driven, you know what I mean? It's like if it's like an artist that like relies on us to bring them records, then like I'm like, hey, like trust my vision, because this is you're the vehicle. But we're gonna push our vision,
right?
But then like you have writers, like I would never like go to like an Ed Sheeran or a Bruno Mars and be like, maybe you should try doing that differently, like unless I truly like believed it. But like I feel like with those kinds of artists, like they are where they are for a reason. They're very creative, and what they've done has worked for them. So I think there's like a balance on how to deliver like what my vision is.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because I mean, they're self-contained. Is what you mean. I mean, yeah. Bruno's always written with those same two people who did his first 3 albums. I mean, that's his team, and Ed has worked, pretty much solo his whole life.
Yeah. So imagine me trying to tell Bruno Mars what he should do.
Right. Yeah.
Right,
no.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
Andrew, in your position, how important is the team of an artist when you're considering signing them? Is that something that you take into account when you're really serious about them?
If there's like a team that like I know and like that I trust, that like I'm close with, I like working with them, like that helps a lot. But it's also one of those things where like if an artist comes to me and they don't have a team, like if there's an artist that's like really talented with no manager, you know what I mean? Like them not having a team is not gonna like shy me away from anything. So it's it's cool like if it's like like reliable people that I know to be around them. But at the end of the day, it's like I'd rather an artist have no team than like a team of people that don't know what they're doing, or that like are kind of like getting in the way of like the potential.
Hey Insiders, we hope that you're enjoying our featured interview. Before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. So hey Ritch, tell me a little bit about the Music Business Registry.
Well, what we are, Music Business Registry is the leading contact directory. We publish all of the most current, accurate, and up-to-date contact information for the music industry. We do directories for A&R. We do directories for music publishers. We do directories for film and television music. We do directories of artist managers, and we do directories of music attorneys. And we also sell other publications too, like the Indie Bible Series, the YouTube Bible Series, the Indie Spotify Bible Series, and other things as well. That's what we're about.
So if I wanted to find out, let's say, the music supervisor for American Horror Story, I can kind of go into the Film and TV monthly and find the information that I need there?
Well, we don't list specific shows. What we do list is if you know who the music supervisor is, and you can find that out on IMDb, then you can find their contact information. And we have that in our Film and Television Music Monthly. Absolutely, yes.
That's great. And I hear that we have a discount right now. If you go to musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your first order.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, we offer that to all of the MUBUTV insiders.
So insiders, check out musicregistry.com and use MUBUTV10 as your coupon code.
Yeah,
you can help them put that team together, I guess, as part of your development with them, which is amazing. Yeah. Andrew, what is Atlantic's philosophy on staying with artists that don't break on their debut release? Because I know Atlantic has a great history of that, where we've talked with Pete Gambarg. I mean, and Atlantic has that history of that artist development. So I'm curious.
Man, I've never been asked that question before. Oh, it's a stump. Oh, I got stumped. Like in my experience, like, like I'm working with like a couple like newer acts right now, and they got absorbed in Atlantic, during a merger, and so one of them, he's this kid. He hadn't put out music in a few years. Like he was going through puberty, his voice was changing, so he kind of just like sat there, and his YouTube presence is good, but he hasn't put out original music in a long time. So we had put together about 3 or 4 songs, that we believed in, like me, the artist, the management team, that we all believed in. And like they told us, like, hey, like let's get these records out, let's see what happens, and then we'll go from there. So they have been supportive, like they have been supportive in like, like letting us try to do stuff with like the baby acts. Like once we have like everything like lined up, ready to go, like, hey, look, we have the song, we spoke to marketing, we have a release plan, we have a video, we can get it done for X amount of money, like let's do it. And they're like, okay, if you guys believe in it, like let's do it. So they have been supportive in that way. That's been my experience. I don't know how it's been for like other artists, but like for me, like that's like what I've witnessed.
Right.
Okay.
All
right. How much weight do you place on an artist live performance ability in terms of signing? I mean, does that factor into it, or is genre a determining factor in that question?
I think it's a little bit of both, but like I feel like there's so many artists in today's times. Like the internet is so heavy that like, like there can be artists that just live on the internet, and there can also be artists that live on tour. So I kind of feel like it just really depends on the artist. I'm not gonna be like turned off or like shy away from an artist because like I see how they perform and like I don't necessarily like it. You know what I mean? Because like if they're killing it with streaming, they're killing it with views and stuff like that, and like they're proven to be working outside of that, it's not gonna bother me. But like I do feel like there's artists that are like performance and tour heavy. You know what I mean? I feel like that's like their specialty.
Okay, so it really depends on the act. Yeah. Okay.
Andrew, are there any books or films that have really resonated with you professionally speaking that you could recommend to our audience, whether it was music industry related or, anything that was influential to you that...
I mean, I don't know about films or books. The one show that like I always like go back to though would have probably been Making the Band.
Okay. All right.
Oh, okay.
So talk about that. What was it about that was so inspirational to you that you loved?
I think
or
it was just
connected
like again, like when you watch that show, it was like, you saw the record making process, you saw, how, Diddy and the producers were like actually like putting together records. You saw like other people putting the vision, like the whole band was put together because of those people's vision, you know what I mean? Like those people, like they weren't put in that group because of their vision. Someone else had their vision, and like the band was kind of the vehicle, and filtered it. So like for me, like once I learned what A&R was, I was just always like intrigued by it.
Okay, so yeah, it's funny. We talked to Tiffany Kumar. Great, yeah, Tiffany's great, and she did the podcast with us, and she talked about that experience because she worked for.
She was on the show, right?
In that period, yeah, she was on the show. He hired her, and working with the artists, writing songs. It was back when she was in New York, when Sean lived in New York.
Didn't Janelle Monáe? Didn't they break that? Or he had just signed Janelle Monáe to the label at that time, hadn't he? On that show, or am I mistaken with that? I don't remember, but I could have sworn that because that was one of Puffy's
I didn't even know that.
Was it? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I believe so.
Right.
I believe so. Yeah. So I was just curious because I was remembering that show, and I was like, I think Janelle Monáe was broken on that show. So.
Andrew, you come from a record engineering, record production background prior to getting into A&R, which is unusual. I'm sure you know that many of your compatriots don't have that level of experience. What advice do you have for someone who wants to get into A&R as a career profession?
I think that there's so many different ways to get into A&R. Like for me, it wasn't because of my engineering background or production background. Like for me, it was because I was managing, writers and producers at the time. And I had, at the time when I got my job, like one of like, like the hottest, songwriters, that was out like doing sessions, with people in LA. And, everybody liked them. Everybody wanted to work with them. And so I kind of, got presented, to the company I'm at now because of like the writer that I had. And then when I went up like for the job, like, like they're like, oh, he also has, one of the, like the hottest talents out right now. So, he's someone we want to be in business with. So I kind of feel like there's so many ways like, you could, you can intern, you can get an internship and then work your way up. You can constantly just like send the label stuff. And if they believe in you, you know what I mean? They might want to bring you on. You know what I mean? You could be a scout. You could, again, manage like one of the hottest people ever and they just want to work with you. I think there's so many different ways to get into it now.
Okay. All right.
Andrew, what advice can you offer our listeners who are wanting to pursue a career as a recording artist? What advice would you give them?
So a lot of my advice, I feel like is really simple, but I feel like it's really effective. So I tell people all the time, like as much as people want to send their music out, I say don't send it out until you believe in your heart that it 100% cannot get any better than like where it is right now. Like if you think it can get better, then don't send it out yet. You know what I mean? Like wait until it's at that point. You know what I mean? Yep. Because like like A&R, anybody in today's time has like a shorter attention span. So, like if there's somebody that's constantly sending you records, like, oh, and like, you give them feedback like, hey, like this doesn't sound right. You could do this better. You could do this better. They're like, oh yeah, like I'm still just like working on it. I'm still developing. I just wanted to get your opinion. And it's like, if you do that like over and over, like eventually the person's like going to be like, yo, like I can't keep giving you my opinion. I don't have time for that. You know what I mean? Just like send it when it's better.
Right. You've got one chance to impress and you have to come out with guns blazing, and that's got to be like at the highest level. I agree. I
also think too, like, again, like my advice is simple, but I think it's effective. I think you have to like look at like what's going on, like on the charts, on Spotify charts. You have to like know what you're competing against. Like, you have to know where your music is going to fit into. And like, there's a lot of times like people like will email me songs and like it'll be like 5 or 6 minutes long, and I'm like, you're not paying attention to what's going on, because there should not be a song that's 5 or 6 minutes, like when TikToks are 30 seconds, or a minute.
Yeah, getting back to your short attention span that we have now as a society. So yeah, I agree.
How can artists or people who are interested in reaching you, how can they best communicate with you? What's the best way to do that?
I mean, I'm checking my email constantly and social media. A lot of times, that's another piece of advice I have. Like if you're talking, or like if you're like, reaching out to somebody and like they respond to you, just like be ready, like with whatever they have. Like there's so many times where somebody, will like DM me on Instagram and they'll be like, hey, can you check out some music for me? I'll be like, yeah, just like send me a link right through here. Like I'll check it right now while we're talking. They're like, okay, well, what's your email too? Like, I'll send you an email. Like, what are you looking for? And I'm like, you already had my attention. You know what I mean? Like,
you weren't prepared.
Now just send it.
You weren't prepared.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so like, I think like once you have someone's attention, just be ready to execute.
Okay. Absolutely. That's great. Andrew, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it very, very much.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. Wow. Some really great insights there from Andrew. I thought. Yes. I think, one thing that really stood out to me is that he's coming from an A&R standpoint as being a recording engineer for 10 years.
Yeah.
That brings a perspective. Jimmy Iovine used to speak about that. He said, hit records are not made after the fact. They're not made from remixes. They're not made from tinkering or whatever. They're made in the studio. And this is a guy who spoke about that. This is a guy who has made hit records. He's been involved in that process. So he's bringing that aspect to the A&R level, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and I also thought getting on his radar, we always talk about how do you get the attention of A&R executives. And I thought it was very interesting. He came from the point where he was hearing it from family members were coming up to him and saying, hey, I've got it. So, and that's not the first person that we've heard that from. I believe there was another person that we interviewed on this podcast that had that same thing. So it's interesting how that's changing and evolving, and the word of mouth and the trusted sources that he goes to. So it's just a real interesting perspective on that.
Yeah, and his views on artist development, which he said really vary because it depends on the artist. Some artists can come to you and they've got their whole package together. They're great, recordings. They've got their live show down. It depends on where they're at in terms of their own career development. So, as his views on artist development is it also depends on the artist. Some need that more than others. Some don't need it at all. Some are just ready to be put into the system or whatever.
Yeah, and I also thought one of the most interesting points about this was he'd rather have an artist that has no team at all rather than a bad team, which is one of the big things that we always ask a lot of our A&R is, how important is the team when signing consideration for an artist. So I thought it was just very interesting because, obviously from the label's perspective, they've got such a plethora of insights and contacts and people that if an artist comes in that they really fall in love with, they can build that team.
Absolutely they can. Yes. And I think what he said is, I would much rather have an artist with no team than a bad team, because he said, I've seen careers become derailed with artists who have a bad manager. And I think Kenny Salcedo also spoke about that. Correct. And he said it was one of the great lessons of his career was, really watching that and making that a priority. The other thing that I thought was really fascinating about our conversation with Andrew is the fact that he spoke about, how Atlantic, and it's true, has a history with staying with artists, over a long period of time. That's reflected in their executive staff, and it's reflected in their artist roster. So that, I thought, those were really interesting kinds of qualities. Anyway, the bottom line with this is that, he gave I think, some really broad, fascinating insights into the A&R process as it applies today.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at mubutv.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.